Hello, and welcome to Global Data Themes Instant Insights. At Global Data, we define a theme as something that keeps a CEO awake at night, as businesses that invest in important themes will succeed, and those that don't will fail.
Hello, and welcome to Instant Insights. I'm Francesca Gregory, and today I'll be talking to Principal Analyst David Bicknell and Service Director David George from the Thematic Intelligence team, following the news that the UK government is considering using national security as grounds to force a London IPO for Arm. Both Davids will be joining me remotely due to the ongoing rail strikes. Thank you both for being here.
Hello, thanks, Fran. It's good to be here.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you both. So, David Bicknell, can you tell us why this Arm IPO is so important and some background about the UK government's involvement so far?
Well, the genesis of this was really NVIDIA's bid to buy Arm, which was a good couple of years ago now, and with the regulatory investigations, ultimately NVIDIA decided to walk away from the bid. That was really important from Arm. It wanted this sort of the bid to succeed, but it now means that NVIDIA, or rather Arm, needs to get sources of income from somewhere else, and the best way of being able to get that income is or investment is via an IPO, initial public offering. The question is, where is that initial public offering going to be? Is it going to be in the UK, which the UK government would prefer, or is it going to be in the US, where there would probably be greater access to funds, greater interest from US companies? At the same time, Arm is very much a UK success story, even if it's actually owned by a Japanese sort of company, Softbank now, and the UK government wants to be seen to be driving tech investment, and for Arm to be seen to be a UK success story, and that's where the problem lies.
Yeah, this seems to be just as much about national image as about technology. Now, if we could come to David George, why is the government's approach so controversial, and will there be ramifications for other companies?
Yeah, thanks, Fran. That's a really interesting question, and I think there's probably a very simple answer and then a more complex one. So I think at a simple high level, it's controversial because the government is suggesting that they're going to use national security legislation to try and influence an IPO. So I think it's, in a way, smacks of desperation that they're trying to threaten companies with national security laws at the same time as they're trying to make the UK a more attractive place for listing. And I think there's a real danger that becomes massively counterproductive. Most companies are always shy of more regulations. I think any country where they're threatened with such a big stick, there's a danger that they will run a mile rather than come to the market, which is why it may be counterproductive. Having said that, I think we need to look in a little bit more detail about some of the factors underneath here. So some basic points. Firstly, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that all listed companies have a legal duty to their shareholders to act in their best interests, not, I would note, those of politicians of whatever political persuasion or party they may belong to. So, firstly, Softbank is a listed entity. It is going to want us to act in the best interests of its shareholders. The government does have a point and an understandable desire to attract more tech listings to London, but it's hard. We don't have the same scale of tech companies as we see in the US. That we've had a number of listings in the last sort of 12, 18 months, some of them that have not performed that well. We still do attract a lot of investment into the UK, particularly around private companies and what's called venture capital, but we are unfortunately struggling often to translate that into a broad base of listed companies. There have been a few measures recently by the FCA, the market regulator, to try and make things more attractive, but that remains to be seen how much impact that has. And then also I think we need to take a step back and not lose sight of what's happening in financial markets at the moment. Those of you who follow them will be aware that it's a pretty bleak picture. We've had a really huge dramatic sell-off of tech company share prices across the world in the last sort of 6 months or so. The economic outlook is bleak and frankly getting even bleaker. And so that does have an impact on the valuations both of listed companies but also unlisted ones, and indeed someone like Arm that is looking to come to market. You might argue that semiconductors is a little bit more more of a bright spot, but it's very hard to argue or to fight against that current tide. So that really puts even more pressure on Softbank to make the right decision for them and their shareholders.
Yeah, Softbank will be prioritising their own interests. To come back to David Bicknell, can you give us an update on where we are now? I mean, this IPO has been such a long-running saga.
Yes, I mean, SoftBank's sole focus here, in the light of the failed Nvidia bid, is achieving a successful listing and getting a targeted valuation, shall we say, of around $50 billion or over. And that remains most likely in New York, where you're going to find sort of semiconductor companies like Qualcomm and others who can consider investing in Arm. In theory, you might have sort of chip makers investing in Arm wherever it listed, even if it was in London. But it's more likely to happen if there's a listing in New York on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. There has been sort of talk that companies like Qualcomm and other semiconductor companies would be prepared to take a stake in Arm, and that is more likelihood. Is more likely to occur from US tech investors for a US-based listing than it would be in the UK. That would put Arm right in the hands of chip makers, which is right where it should be. I think the best that the UK government can hope for is a secondary London listing, but stamping its feet and trying to strong arm SoftBank in the way it has is really the wrong way of going about it.
Yeah. So David George, when all said and done, how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I very much agree with what David Bicknell has just said. I think ultimately, I think the most likely outcome here is that we see a primary listing in the US and then probably a secondary listing for London, which would not be a bad outcome. And I think it's probably worth saying that ultimately the financial interests or the economic interests of this country are probably best served long term by a successful listing that raises as much money as possible and provides real security for the future outlook for Arm, gives them the funding to invest and to continue to perform well as they have been. And I think anything that attempts to sort of restrain that or constrain SoftBank in what they're able to do is going to be counterproductive in terms of the long-term success of Arm.
Thank you to both the Davids for those instant insights. Thanks for listening, and from us in Thematic Intelligence, see you next time.